After graduation, I thought the hardest battles were behind me. I was wrong. My grandparents' estate, $1 million, and the house that held every memory of love they gave me was left in my care. But last week, my parents and sister pulled into the driveway with a moving truck. They smiled like they already won. "The house is ours. You're out Friday." I stood on the porch, calm, almost cold, and said, "Do you really think I'd let that happen?" 2 days later, when they came back with movers, they froze. Someone else was already waiting for them, holding the folder that would end their game. I'm Kyle, and this is my story. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story reaches. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if you find my story worth hearing, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Every voice, every listen keeps me strong. The harbor smelled of salt and diesel, a mix I had known since I was a kid hauling crates on the docks. That evening, the sky over Portland turned the color of bruised peaches as the last notes of applause from the MBA ceremony faded. Families clustered for photos, laughter echoing off the old brick facades. I stood alone at the edge of the pier, my cap in my hand, staring at the row of empty chairs where my parents and sister should have been. They never came. For a moment, I wanted to believe traffic held them up, that maybe a storm on I-95 had delayed them. But I knew better. I'd always known better. This was their pattern: lyrics recital, lyrics audition, lyrics apartment lease, all more important than showing up for me. I whispered into the ocean air, low enough for only myself to hear. No one writes my story for me anymore. Not them. Not anyone. The memories came in sharp fragments. High school graduation me scanning the crowd gown, clinging in the June heat. They arrived late, explaining they had to rush Lyric to a violin competition. They stayed long enough for a few stiff photos, then vanished. My father told me like it was a life lesson. Independence teaches you to value what you earn. What it really meant was, don't expect us to show up. College years, nights unloading lobster traps to pay tuition, mornings chasing scholarship deadlines. When I finally got into the MBA program, I told my father with the shaky excitement of someone who wanted his approval. His reply was simple, flat. "Figure it out yourself." I did. But that sentence carved something permanent into me. There had been one refuge: weekends at my grandparents' house on Penobscot Bay. My grandfather Elliot teaching me how to mend a fence with his calloused hands, my grandmother Vivian coaxing blossoms from the stubborn camellia bushes. They never compared me to Lyric. They never measured me against anyone. In that weathered stone house with the red camellias by the porch, I felt chosen, not overlooked. Back in Portland, the night settled heavy. I checked my phone, no texts, no calls, not even a hollow congratulations. I slid the phone into my pocket and walked down the cobbled street lined with gas lamps and coffee shops closing up. I typed a note into my phone: "Protect what's worth keeping." I lifted my eyes to the dark waves. If my family wouldn't protect me, then the question was clear. Did I have the strength to protect myself? And what about the legacy my grandparents had built? As if in answer, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from an unfamiliar number. "This is Henry Caldwell. I need to speak with you about the estate of Elliot and Vivian." Camden smelled like home brine, wood smoke, fried clams wafting from the pier. Henry Caldwell's office sat on the second floor of a weathered building, its stairwell creaking underfoot. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves of ledgers and case files, the air thick with dust and the faint sweetness of pipe tobacco. Henry was older than I remembered from town meetings, his glasses sliding down his nose as he gestured for me to sit. He folded his hands, deliberate, then said words that seemed to split the room open. "Your grandparents left you everything. The waterfront house, the accounts, in total about $1 million. Full authority rests with you." For a second, I couldn't breathe. Not because of the money, but because it felt like something I had craved my whole life: recognition. Not favoritism, not charity, recognition. Henry leaned back, slid a thin envelope across the table. "There's a sealed addendum from Vivian. She asked that only you open it. It's hidden behind their wedding photo in the living room. I drove straight to the house on the bay key, trembling in my hand as I opened the door. The air still smelled faintly of my grandmother's cinnamon bread. I lifted the wedding portrait from the wall, pried open the back, and found the letter. Her handwriting curled across the page. "We chose you because you chose us. You showed up when it mattered, not for a picture, but for a promise. Keep this home alive, not sold. 5 years at least. Protect it for the community that gave us everything." I sank onto the couch, letter pressed to my chest. She hadn't just trusted me with walls and money, she'd trusted me with memory, with duty. Outside, the camellias were in bloom, defiant red against the gray sea air. I stepped onto the porch, touched the petals, and felt her presence in every vein. Clara Webb shuffled across the lawn with her shopping tote. She waved, then leaned closer with the ease of an old neighbor. "Strange thing, your sister stopped by a few months ago, asking what this place might be worth. Said she needed to see the deed for work. Odd, huh?" The pit in my stomach tightened. Later that night, my phone pinged, an Instagram tag from Lyric. A staged family photo in front of our parents' house, fairy lights twinkling in the background. Caption, "Family first." She'd tagged me as if daring me to respond. I didn't. Henry's warning echoed in my head, disputes over fairness, trouble over inheritance. He urged me to get the paperwork locked down quickly. When I left his office the next morning, I spotted my father across the street talking to a local realtor I recognized. The moment he saw me, he turned away, pretending not to notice. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. Boston moved fast in a way Camden never tried to. I took the morning train, sat by the window, and watched the coastline slip past like a reel of old film boats, salt marsh smokestacks, then brick and steel pulling tight around the horizon. Jonah met me at a cafe that smelled like espresso and burnt sugar. He still wore the same quarter zip from college, still talked in clean bullet points. I set up the intro, he said, tapping his laptop. "Lucas is good. He'll make it clean, boring, and airtight." Boring is what you want. Lucas Reed's office was 3 floors up in a row building with green shutters and uneven stairs. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a legal pad already half filled. He didn't waste words. "Irrevocable trust," he said, underlining the term. "Title moves from you to the trust. The trust owns an LLC. The LLC holds the house and the financial accounts. New bank accounts under the LLC. All utilities, electric, water, internet shifted to the entity. You remain trustee with exclusive control. Your grandmother's condition not to sell for 5 years becomes a governing clause. If someone tries to pry, they get drywall, not studs." I nodded, feeling something loosen between my ribs. "Do it." We went line by line. He read each clause aloud, and I initialed in the margins. The language was precise, a fence built out of verbs and definitions. When it was time to sign, my hand didn't shake. I thought about my grandmother's letter, how she had asked for more than legality, she'd asked for continuity. This was how I kept the house alive, not as a trophy, but as a living place. Outside, the city rattled and honked. Inside, Lucas flipped to a different file. "One more thing. I looked through county records before you came. 4 months ago, someone requested a comprehensive deed and lien search on the property using an intermediary. The requester listed a shell company out of Bangor. The address matches an office used by a notary who had disciplinary issues a few years back. The name attached was D. Markham. He let that sit, then added, "No violation on paper. But it's the kind of chess move made 3 turns ahead." I pictured my father on that sidewalk with the local realtor. I pictured Lyric asking a neighbor about the deed, the way she said "for work," like it made the request harmless. The pieces didn't feel random anymore. Back in Camden that evening, Jonah pulled into the driveway with a duffel bag of gear and a smile that was all problem-solving. We walked the house together. "Angles," he said, crouching by the porch beam. "You want coverage, but you don't want the cameras to look like a dare." We tucked one in the corner trim of the porch, another above the hallway arch, a third behind a vented bookend in the study where my grandfather kept a brass compass. The system mirrored to my phone and to a local hard drive in a locked metal box. If someone tried to pull the plug, it would chirp a warning to a second drive Jonah mounted under the kitchen sink. Every feed backed up offline. While he ran cable, I made a list at the dining table. Change locks. File address changed to a P.O. box. Transfer CMP Water District and Internet to the LLC. Keep a log of every call and visit. I found a thin cloth-bound notebook in my grandfather's desk and wrote the date at the top of the first page. All contacts regarding house. It felt old-fashioned on purpose. Paper has a way of slowing people down. By afternoon, the house was bristling with quiet eyes. Jonah wiped his hands and stood back to admire the invisible. Anyone tries a drawer, you'll know, he said. And if they bring someone in with a tool bag after dark, you'll know that too. My phone lit up with my mother's name. I let it ring once, then answered. When are you moving into the Bay House? She asked, light curious, the tone of someone browsing a store, not asking about my life. I said I hadn't decided. She pivoted to lyric. She's so excited about expanding her business. There's an opportunity if the timing is right. I kept my voice, even offered nothing. After we hung up, Lyric texted an hour later, bubbles popping up fast. We should sell while the market's hot and split it. I could open my studio next month if we do it right. I typed and deleted, then settled on. Let's revisit later. A lot is in motion. That night I drove back to Portland. The city felt cooler, cleaner, like a boundary. I filed service changes and sat with the bank to open new accounts. The manager, a man with careful hands, asked about projected inflows and maintenance expenses. I gave him numbers and dates, practiced and calm. On my way out, I bought a small lockbox and a stack of stamped envelopes. Control is 100 small decisions in a row. The calls didn't stop. My mother left a message about family unity. Lyric sent me a photo of her standing in front of a mural with a caption about vision boards. I answered only what I had to, documented the rest. When I slept, it was shallow and quick, the way you sleep before an exam you can't afford to fail. A few days later, Lucas emailed a compiled report of the county lookups, including the line that made my mouth go dry. The search tied to D. Markham had requested certified copies of prior deeds and notary acknowledgments. Not illegal, but corner of the eye worrying. I forwarded it to my private email and printed a hard copy for the house file. If someone was assembling a story, I wanted mine indexed. Before bed, I opened the notebook and wrote, "Plan for next attempt, do not argue. Document. Bring a witness when necessary. No doorways without a camera." Outside the window, the harbor tug blew a low horn that vibrated through the glass. I stared into the dark until my phone buzzed with a message from an aunt in Boston. "Heard you're keeping everything. What about Lyric?" I placed the phone face down and looked at the trust papers on the table, the clause anchoring 5 years like a keel. The weather was changing. You can smell a front before the rain comes. My father called it a family dinner, like the words could fix what they'd broken by habit. I went because sometimes you need to see the board up close. The house in Camden was dressed the way my mother likes, for company: fresh hydrangeas on the entry table, lemon oil in the air, the kitchen lit warm, oysters roasted with butter and paprika, a bottle of white sweating on the counter. They greeted me with kisses on the cheek, all light and gloss. For a half hour we talked weather and traffic, and a town council vote like none of us had anything heavier inside our chests. Then my father set his fork down and looked at me the way he does when he's already decided something. "Fairness," he said, as if naming a principle made it real. "It would be fair if you let Lyric co-manage the property. She has experience with clients. She understands growth." I sipped my water. "The estate has clear directions," I said. "I'm following them." My mother tried a softer angle. "You know your sister's business is taking off. The house could be a cornerstone away for the family to build together. It's wasteful to lock it down." I smiled and said nothing more. The food grew quiet on our plates. After a time, my mother cleared dishes with quick hands and changed the subject to a neighbor's remodel, a fundraiser, a new cafe near the harbor. It's an old trick: if you don't like an answer, drown it in noise. When I left, I paused in the foyer to tie my shoe. My mother's voice carried low from the kitchen to the hall. "He's keeping it all," she said into her phone, the words clipped. "He's not ready. Lyric knows how to put money to use." I waited the way you wait for a kettle to finish. Then I opened the door and stepped into the cool Camden night, steady on the porch steps, even if my stomach wasn't. The next afternoon, Lyric showed up at the Bay House with a foil-wrapped loaf of my mother's bread and a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. She complimented the camellias, the view, the way the light hit the living room at 4. She drifted as if by accident toward the study and set the bread on the desk. "You still have the deed in here?" she asked breezy. "Just curious. Paperwork fascinates me lately." "I moved most of the important files to safer storage," I said, which was true enough. She laughed, said I was becoming such an adult, and left 5 minutes later with a hug that didn't reach her eyes. At the farmer's market on Saturday, Clara Webb bagged tomatoes while I waited with coffee. She lowered her voice. "Your sister's been talking to folks, asking what the place might fetch, asking where your grandparents kept documents. Strange lines of curiosity. Thanks for telling me," I said. I meant it. I also meant to keep my pulse even. That night, a motion alert pinged my phone at 12:41 a.m. I rolled out of bed and opened the live feed. 2 figures in the yard. My father and a man I didn't recognize. They tested the back door handle and the window latch near the kitchen. When the security light popped on, they stepped back into the shadows, waited, tried once more, then gave up and left. I watched the grainy playback twice, then saved the clip to the hard drive, and to a separate thumb drive I labeled in red. I didn't call. Not yet. Silence can be more instructive than a confrontation. In the morning, an aunt in Boston texted again, "You should share. People are talking. Don't be greedy." The word landed like a stone. I put the phone down and made coffee strong enough to bite. On Sunday afternoon, my father invited me to the harbor for chowder, just us. We ate on a bench, gulls wheeling overhead. He told me stories I'd heard before about how hard it was when he and my mother were young, how they built from nothing. Then he slid a sentence in like a needle. "There's no sense hoarding a property when it could help the family move forward. Your sister has real momentum. I'm taking care of the house," I said. "That's my job." He stared at the water and didn't answer. By then, the pattern was loud enough to map. Dinner for persuasion, a home visit for reconnaissance, a night attempt for testing the seams, whispers for reputational pressure. In between, social media dressed as virtue, a filtered photo, a caption about love and fairness. I wrote the sequence in the notebook with times and places, added the video still of the yard, folded a printout of my mother's Instagram post with the comments from cousins who thought they were helping. None of it surprised me. All of it clarified me. When I ran into Clara again, she squeezed my forearm the way older neighbors do when words aren't enough. "You look like your grandfather when you make that face," she said. "The one that means you've decided." Back home, I walked the perimeter at dusk, the air cold and clean, the camellias glowing like coals under the porch light. I checked each door, each window, pressed my palm to the wood of the study desk like it could relay strength back through the grain. My phone buzzed with another message from Boston Share, so people don't think the worst. I set it beside the trust binder and stared at both until the room went quiet. Holding my ground wasn't complicated. It just had to be consistent. Don't be baited. Don't be bullied. Don't explain more than the documents already do. If they wanted a fight in the driveway, they wouldn't get one. If they wanted a paper trail, I would give them one mine. The only question I let myself ask in the hush between the surf and the ticking kitchen clock was how to keep the advantage without showing my hand. I didn't need them to like my boundaries. I just needed them to learn where they were. I swept the porch the way my grandfather used to, long strokes, bristles, pushing salt-dusted leaves into neat lines. The bay breathed in and out below the hill. A black SUV rolled to a stop at the curb doors, opening in a choreography that told me they'd practiced this. Lyric stepped out first, hair pulled tight, sunglasses even though the sky was gray. My father followed, folder in hand. My mother hovered, smile fixed like a brooch. Lyric didn't bother with hello. "We should get this over with," she said, already moving toward the steps. My father climbed beside her and held out a set of papers, the blue stamp flashing in the light. "A corrected version of the will," he said. "Properly acknowledged. The house divided between you and your sister. No reason to drag this out." I took the folder, let the pages breathe, The language was slick, too polished, the dates smudged in a way my eye caught from years of filling out forms at docks and banks. I looked up and smiled, the same measured smile I'd given the harbor master when he tried to short me hours at 19. "Is that so?" I said, and handed the folder back. "I'll stick with the original instructions." Lyric stepped closer, perfume sharp and floral. "Don't be stubborn," she said. "This is a chance for us to fix what they overlooked." She glanced past me toward the study. "You still keep the documents in there." "I keep what matters where it belongs," I said. "You can see yourselves out." They left with the stiffness of people who hadn't gotten the reaction they rehearsed. The SUV's taillights blinked at the bottom of the hill, and then were gone. I pulled out the cloth-bound notebook and wrote the time, the weather, their exact words. Then I took a photo of the entry and emailed it to myself. Paper and pixels side by side. Clara Webb called while I was still at the porch rail. "Your father stopped by Coastal Realty," she said, voice low like gossip was a duty. "Asked for a quick range on waterfront listings. Said he was doing research for a friend. We both know what that means." "Thank you," I said, "for calling me first." At home that night, the screens told their own version. Lyric posted a photo of the house from the road angle, tight, no address, but anyone local would know. Caption, "Real love is fairness." The comments bloomed fast. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years typed heart emojis. A neighbor wrote something about sharing blessings. I set the phone down and let the room go quiet. The camellias knocked softly on the window in the wind. At 1:12 a.m. my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I slid from bed and opened the live feed. The study camera caught a sliver of shoulder and a hand at the desk drawer. Lyric alone, hair loose, now the glow from her phone lighting her face. She lifted the drawer, took photos of envelopes that held nothing more than appliance manuals and a stack of paid tax receipts, then closed it carefully, as if careful erased intent. I saved the clip to both drives and wrote the minute in the notebook with a long underline. Morning brightened slow. I drove to Portland to keep the routine intact. Work emails, a client call about a summer launch, the kind of normal that steadies your hands. At lunch, a classmate from the MBA pinged me a photo from a networking event downtown. Lyric in a fitted blazer, her arm around a local broker, captioned with a promise about expanding her firm this quarter. I stared at the screen until the text went blurry, then closed the app and answered 2 client briefs in a row just to prove to myself I could. That evening I spread the fake papers across my kitchen table and reached for the notes Lucas had sent. The seal on my father's folder matched a name I already knew from the county search, initial D, last name the same as the notary with a history. The address on the acknowledgement line listed a suite and Bangor that belonged to a company with no website, no phone number, the kind of office that exists to collect mail and dodge questions. I traced each line with my finger, then slid the papers into a plastic sleeve labeled with the date and a short description. Evidence is less about drama than it is about order. The calls started after dinner. 1 from my mother that I let go to voicemail. 11 from Lyric that I watched rack up until the phone screen dimmed and lit again. Her last post of the night was a selfie with mascara tracking at the corners. Some betrayals hurt more because they come from blood. I didn't respond. I wrote the number of missed calls in the notebook and turned off the lights. The house hummed, a refrigerator, a baseboard heater, the old rhythm of a place that had learned to withstand weather by standing still. I swept the porch at dawn, the bristles whispering across wood. The bay looked iron flat, the kind of morning where boats stayed tied. I felt it then, more than thought it. The quiet part of the fight was ending. The next time they wouldn't come with polite paper and staged photos. They'd come to move me by force of narrative, or failing that, by force of bodies and boxes. I tightened the bolt on the screen door, checked the porch camera's angle, and waited for my coffee to drip into the pot, one patient beat at a time. Preparation steadies the blood. I drove to Boston with a folder that had grown fat, printouts of the trust, the LLC filings, the utilities transfer confirmations, the county pull sheets, the camera stills, the logbook entries copied onto letterhead. In Nia Kapoor's office, the blinds cut the sun into long bars across the conference table. She read fast, lips pressed thin, then looked up at me like a coach about to send a player in. "You've done the work," she said. "Now we control the setting. We planned it like an event." I called Miles Thornton at the county office and asked him to stop by the house on a casual basis, a welfare check, a community courtesy. He agreed without hesitation. He'd known my grandparents for 30 years. On the drive back, I pulled off at Camden Hills and walked to the overlook where the bay spreads out like a map. I stood there with wind cutting through my jacket and said out loud what I needed to hear. Hold the line, speak only to facts, keep witnesses near. The morning they chose arrived with a hard blue sky. I set the trust binder on the living room table beside a vase of red camellias and the framed letter my grandmother had written. I unlocked the front door and left it open to the screen, then made coffee and waited for the road to tell me they were close. Engines first, then gravel snapping under tires. The SUV with a moving truck behind it, the company logo painted across the side in cheerful fonts. Doors slammed. Lyric led again. "This is happening today," she called from the porch steps. "You can pack what you want, but we're not waiting until Friday." I stood. "You think I'd let that happen?" She blinked, confusion crossing her face like a quick cloud. "It's already decided," she said, but her voice didn't carry the way it had before. My father stepped into the doorway with fresh copies of the bogus papers. My mother stayed near the driveway, directing movers toward the path with a brisk wave. "Let's be adults," my father said. "Sign the acknowledgement. Hand over a key. We'll sort the rest in mediation." A second car pulled in county plates. Miles climbed out in his windbreaker, nodded to me, then took in the scene, the truck, the papers, the family arranged like a tableau. He walked to the table, glanced at the binder, read the first page with the calm that can only come from dealing with disputes for a living. "This property is held by a trust," he said, voice even. "The trustee is present. These documents you're waiving don't match records on file, and the acknowledgement appears irregular. I'm advising you to stop immediately. You can't tell us what to do," Lyric snapped, but she stepped back half an inch. The movers slowed. I slid the cease and desist draft from the folder and set it beside the camellias. "Before you go any further," I said, "understand that everything after this point is documented and will be used where it belongs." My father's certainty cracked. "We were just correcting an error," he said, looking to my mother for reinforcement that didn't come. "You tried to correct the past," I said. "The law doesn't work that way." My phone buzzed. "Nia." I put her on speaker. She introduced herself to Miles, then spoke clearly into the square of the room. "We have evidence that the contested documents were prepared through an out-of-state filing service using a notary previously disciplined by the state board. The requester name matches one already flagged in the county's inquiry logs. If this continues, we will file for injunctive relief and refer the matter for criminal review." She paused. "For the record, the trust instrument prohibits sale for 5 years and vests authority solely in my client." Across the room, the lead mover made a small circling motion with his hand. His team lifted nothing. My mother's mouth tightened, then flattened altogether. Lyric's eyes went glassy with anger that didn't have anywhere to land. "You'll regret this," she said, but it sounded thin, like a paper banner in wind. Miles took a photo of the bogus packet, the truck, the porch. "We're done here," he said to the movers. "If you proceed, you'll be part of a report you don't want your boss to read." The men nodded, backed down the steps, and began to close the truck's ramp. The street grew quiet the way a room does after someone has shouted and realized it didn't change anything. In the hours that followed, the mess moved online. My mother organized a family group chat and began sending paragraphs about me isolating my grandparents at the end about how I'd misunderstood their wishes. A cousin chimed in with a lecture about kindness. Screenshots poured in from Tessa Brooks, who'd been added by mistake once and never removed. I saved everything. By late afternoon, a notice hit my inbox from the state licensing portal. Lyric's firm had placed her on leave pending review of a complaint. No names in the notice, but the timing wasn't subtle. I looked at the camellias on the table petals, heavy and perfect, and thought of my grandmother's hands in the dirt. Clara knocked at dusk with a grocery bag and a look that said she'd seen the truck from her kitchen window. "You okay?" she asked. I told her I was. I wasn't sure if it was true, but the word fit better than it had a month ago. She handed me a thumb drive. "Your camera emailed me a clip by accident," she said, almost sheepish. "Or on purpose. Nighttime. Your sister in the study." I added it to the folder without comment and poured her a glass of water. We stood at the sink and watched the sky turn violet. When she left, the house settled in around me. I gathered the documents, the printouts, the notes, and stacked them into a clean pile on the table beside the vase. The porch light flicked on by timer. In the hallway, the study camera made its soft mechanical blink. My phone vibrated with a new message from my mother, a final paragraph about forgiveness that sounded like a closing argument to people who didn't know the facts. I took a breath, opened the folder from Nia, and slid out the letter that carried the weight of all the preparation, the formal notice demanding they cease harassment, and attempts to interfere with trust property signed and ready. I held it by its edges, the paper cool against my fingers, and pictured the route it would take: mailbox, sorting center, their kitchen counter next to a fruit bowl, and an unpaid bill. I pictured the moment the room would go quiet when they read the seal. I walked to the door, felt the old floor give under my heel, and stood on the porch with the envelope in my hand. Down on the road, a car idled and then moved on. The bay breathed in and out. I looked at the camellias at the house, at the life that was mine to defend, and then I stepped down onto the path toward the mailbox. The legal letter landed on my desk in Portland, demanding money, a monthly stipend, and half the house. It accused me of exploiting my grandparents' words, sharp enough to cut if I let them. At the same time, my phone pulsed with screenshots. My mother had turned the family group chat into a tribunal, telling relatives I had cornered Elliot and Vivian in their final years. Lyric added her part online, a photo of her crying with the caption, "Betrayed by my own blood." Comments piled up until the lie felt louder than the truth. But then Tessa called. She had recordings from a side chat, my mother coaching relatives on how to shame me publicly, Lyric laughing in the background. I drove straight to Boston and sat with Nia Kapoor. Together we built a 15-page statement, the trust filings, bank records, fraudulent seals, and the letter my grandmother wrote. Facts stacked higher than noise. I sent the file to 30 relatives at once. Silence, then waves of replies, apologies from some, disbelief from others. Yet the tide turned. Lyric's firm suspended her. The county opened an inquiry into forged documents. That night my phone rang over and over, 15 missed calls from Lyric, no messages, just silence and one last post. Someone destroyed my life. I stood on the porch in Camden binder, open in my hands, camellias glowing faint in the dark. For the first time I felt I was no longer defending. I was leading the fight, carrying my grandparents' honor forward. A week later, the fight ended with a thin envelope. My parents' lawyer withdrew every demand, asking only for no further contact. Outside, the bay was still. I read the letter once, then laid it aside, a retreat dressed in formality. News of Lyric spread quickly. She was dismissed from her firm, her name in county files for forged acknowledgments. The career she flaunted online dissolved overnight. That evening I stood on the porch looking at the water. I kept it safe, I whispered. Not victory, but release. Inside I touched the wedding photo on the wall, my grandfather's words echoing, "Protect what's worth keeping. Don't wait for someone else." Clara came by with a young camellia plant. They'd be proud, she said. I placed it beside the old bushes, new roots beside old. At Camden Hills I wrote to Tessa, thanking her, telling her one truth I now carried. Family is no excuse to accept harm. Cleaning the study days later, I found a notebook hidden in a drawer. My grandparents had tracked every expense I'd helped cover, every repair, every hour, with a final line. We saw every sacrifice. We never forgot. My chest ached at their silent witness. Soon, an invitation arrived from Boston to speak anonymously at a symposium on legacy. I said yes. Pain could become a lesson. One last night I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. A camellia petal dropped onto the step as the tide moved steady below. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, I whispered. It's respect. The bay answered with its patient rhythm, carrying the truth out to sea.